In this section, we're talking about the Articles of Confederation, the first framework for our government during the American Revolution and for several years afterwards. Our essential question is, what were the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, a government that ultimately did not work for the United States and was replaced with our current Constitution? So the question became, after the Revolutionary War, what type of government are the colonies going to have? Actually, this was a question in the midst of the war as well. Once the colonies declared independence, those newly formed states began writing constitutions. Within those state constitutions, there were several common themes. First of all, most of them had a Bill of Rights, a guarantee of freedoms, of rights that the government cannot take away, and also a separation of powers, different branches, legislative, executive, and judicial, in order to stop power from being concentrated in one body or just one person. So, to understand the Articles of Confederation, you need to understand what a confederation is: a union of political units for common action. Within a confederation, it tends to be a very loose relationship. There's really no official bonds holding this group together. In fact, under the Articles of Confederation, the states considered themselves within a firm league of friendship. You're probably familiar with the idea that friendships can come and go. Unless you have something that is permanently bonding you with someone, that's a very uneasy relationship. So the Articles of Confederation were the original federal constitution drafted by the Continental Congress in 1777 in the midst of the Revolutionary War. The Articles of Confederation were ratified, which means approved, in 1781, the last year of fighting within the war. So the Articles of Confederation are going to be the rules of our federal government for the first 10 years or so of our country's existence. So under the Articles of Confederation, the states have the most power. There was a specific reason why the Continental Congress set up government this way. They were afraid of a tyrannical government taking away their rights. They didn't want any system that was similar to that of Parliament or the King over in Great Britain. So under the Articles of Confederation, most of the power lies with the states. This will not provide for a strong, effective government. We're going to see some of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and problems that the nation wasn't equipped to deal with under that government. So there were three basic powers that were given to the federal government. They could raise an army, they could declare and conduct war and sign treaties, they could also conduct relations with foreign nations. That was pretty much end of list. All of these things have in common the theme of war. They were given the power to conduct and end wars. This graphic shows us, broken down, powers granted to the federal government under the Articles of Confederation, and the federal government at this point would be just Congress, and then the powers withheld by the Articles of Confederation. Congress could not raise revenue through taxes, and they could not regulate trade or collect tariffs, which is another type of tax. So let's break that down. So the first weakness of the Articles of Confederation was a lack of money. The federal government could not levy, which means collect, taxes. They had to request money from the states in order to conduct business that required funds. Throughout the Revolutionary War, this is how they funded the Continental Army, which is why Congress was constantly lacking money to give to the American troops. So they struggled during the war with money, and then after the war, the Congress is going to struggle to pay off national debt because of their inability to raise taxes. They also cannot regulate interstate commerce. Interstate, as a term, refers to something that involves two or more states. Commerce refers to business. So you are going to have these newly formed states that are looking out for their own interests, all determining their own trade policy, which are going to have different rules, and then trying to trade with each other. It is going to be a mess. And the federal government is not able to step in and regulate. The Articles of Confederation also had structural issues. There was no executive branch, which means that there was no president, which means that there was no leadership for the federal government. The federal government at this point is just one Congress, a unicameral Congress. Each state, no matter the size, has one vote. So Virginia, which has millions of people, and then Rhode Island, which has just a handful, they still have the same amount of power, which is inherently unfair for the millions of people that are being represented by Virginia. Amending the Articles required a unanimous approval. Everyone has to be fully in agreement. And if you think about how different these states are going to be, right? Think about how the New England colonies developed. Think about their economies, what their priorities are, and then think about the South and how they developed. It's going to be hard to get these two on the same page. The Congress was able to accomplish a few important things under the Articles of Confederation, most of them dealing with settling the newly acquired lands in the Northwest Territory, the Ohio River Valley. So the Land Ordinance of 1785 was a law which designed a system for managing and settling the lands in the Northwest Territory. We see here it developed a plan for establishing a township within these areas. There was also the Northwest Ordinance 2 years later, 1787, which was a law that provided a basis for governing the Northwest Territory. Under the Northwest Ordinance, the United States will add 5 new states to its rank. The Northwest Ordinance said that once territories reached a certain population, that they could become states, and that's the process that we're going to use every time that we add a new state to the United States. The Northwest Ordinance also said that the newly added states would be equal to the 13 original states, that Ohio is not going to have less power just because they joined a little bit later than North Carolina. Another important thing about the Northwest Ordinance is that it prohibited slavery. So here we are going to set the seeds of an issue that will eventually tear the United States apart. The Congress determines that slavery is not an acceptable institution to spread into this area. A big part of that is going to be economics. There's really no reason to have large plantations with hundreds of slaves within Ohio. Whenever southern states begin to be added, slavery will spread in the South. But every time we add a new state or we expand westward, the question's going to come up again, should slavery be allowed to expand there? And once we gain most of the Southwest United States in the 1840s, the question of the expansion of slavery will eventually lead us to the Civil War. So in the 1780s, there is an economic crisis. The war had disrupted the economy. Great Britain was our #1 trade partner. Then we were at war with them. After war, we're still struggling to get on our feet. Many of the states have debt from funding the revolution. And there's really no plan in place to fix this economy. So in several states, we are going to see armed rebellions against state governments. You are seeing American citizens take up arms against democratically elected governments. The biggest example of this is Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion starts in western Massachusetts. This is a more rural area of the state where most people are farmers. That's how they make their living. That's how they feed themselves. After the war, these farmers who could not pay their debts to the states began having their farms seized, and the farmers were put in jail for not paying debts. So this is bad for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're taking away their livelihood, their way to make money. But second of all, many states had property requirements to vote. So whenever you strip these men of their property, you are also dropping them down in society. To make matters even worse, many of these farmers were Revolutionary War veterans, including Daniel Shays, who is going to end up organizing these farmers and leading Shays' Rebellion. So these men led an armed uprising against the state government in Boston. Prior to taking up arms against the government, these men had petitioned the state government, let them know their grievances against them, tried to get them to change in order to better represent them. Honestly, a lot of the same actions that American patriots took against the British. Obviously, those American patriots then led an armed uprising against the government in Great Britain. The difference is that these are democratically elected governments. These men do have representation, even if they are not happy with the type of government that is taking place. So here's a picture of Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion is going to be important for one major reason, and that is that it leads to the Constitution. The occurrence of Shays' Rebellion and other rebellions like it demonstrated the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. They show that there is social disruption that the Articles of Confederation are not equipped to deal with. So in talking about what to do about Shays' Rebellion and to prevent future uprisings, the leaders of our new nation decide to get together to amend the Articles, which leads to the creation of the Constitution. So when we look at Shays' Rebellion as an event, the cause of Shays' Rebellion is economic issues. The effect is the Constitutional Convention.